All right. Okay. So welcome everybody to Kids Camp 2. This is our live online training session. So basically the goal of today, what are we going to go through? So for the Kids Camp 2 content, we're going to go through everything from, we're going to start off with like the high level agenda, just giving you like an overview of what the week is going to look like, what your day-to-day kind of main topics and main classes are going to be. And then we'll actually go into each individual PowerPoint presentation and look at all the different slides that you're going to be presenting, talking about, pretty much like what to say when you're talking about these topics, kind of your main points for each slide. Again, we'll run through activities as well. So just when it comes to the activities, some of the details of like logistically, how does this kind of work? What's the best way to run this? And then we'll look a little bit at field trips too. So we'll talk about locations, and that can vary from city to city. So whether you're Toronto, Ottawa, and Chicago, there might be some variation there. But overall, the assignments and the activities that you'll be doing on the field trips, they won't change. So it's really important just to kind of run through again the logistics of everything and how it's going to work. So yeah, the very first thing to start off with, before we even get into the details of Kids Camp 2, I think it's really important just to very quickly talk a little bit about Kids Camp 1. So in terms of our kids programming, the first level of camp for Kids Camp would be Kids Camp 1. And so for some of you instructors, you will be teaching that program, but some of you, you don't teach that program. So it's good to kind of know just what's covered there. So the Kids Camp 1 program, that's our intro level program for our 8 to 12-year-old range. And Kids Camp 1 is a little less technical, I would say, than our Teen Camp program, but we still cover a lot of really kind of big concepts. So in Kids Camp 1, they learn aperture, they learn shutter speed, and they learn ISO. They also learn white balance. They just don't learn full manual mode. So in in Kids Camp 1, they shoot in their semi-auto modes. So they learn about program mode, they learn about shutter priority, and they learn about aperture priority. And then other big topics that are included in Kids Camp 1 would be composition. So they learn some of their compositional rules, which includes rule of thirds, simplicity, angles, leading lines, as well as natural framing. And then the basis for Kids Camp 1 is, with any of our kids programming really, is that we try and make it as activity-based as possible. So as much as we're kind of like giving them, the lessons and sort of the lectures, we try and make it as hands-on and activity-based as possible. So some of the fun activities, just as highlights that they do in Kids Camp 1, Lego World is the main activity that they get to do that week, where they get little Lego men and they get to go and create kind of like a story behind it. It's really fun. They do something called the Abstract Photo Challenge, where they have to take an abstract photo that stumps the group. They get to make homemade filters for their cameras. So you can see it's very sort of hands-on. So it's just really good for you as an instructor who's teaching Kids Camp 2 to know that that's the background that some of these campers are coming from. So they might already have this sort of foundation. And, there might be times in Kids Camp 2 where, as an example, you're reviewing what they learned in Kids Camp 1. So that's why it's just kind of nice to go through it really, really generally. Okay, so that's Kids Camp 1. So then let's dive on into Kids Camp 2. So what I'm going to do in order for you guys to kind of follow along is I'm actually going to share my screen. So if you give me a second here, I'm going to share my screen and I am going to pull up our master agenda. So do you see a master agenda now on your screen that says Kids Camp 2 agenda? Okay, beautiful. So all the material that we're going to go through today, so the master agenda, which you see in front of you, as well as the program slides, the PowerPoints, they're all going to be sent to you after this live training session. So you're going to have access to everything, and you'll be using it throughout the summer. So it's just really important that a lot of our material, if not all of it, is online on Google Drive. So when I send you links to all these resources, it'd be a really good idea to sort of star those emails or maybe just bookmark the pages, because you will be using them throughout the summer on a regular basis. Okay?
Perfect.
All right, so Kids Camp 2. All right, let's look at day 1 to start off with here. So basically, the general structure of our camps, just to keep in mind, is that camp, again, it runs Monday to Friday, and the hours of camp are 9 until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's when programming actually happens, 9 to 3. So the general outline for a lot of our camps is that they follow a structure of a lesson in the morning from 9 until 12, lunch from 12 until 1, and then field trip from 1 o'clock until 3 o'clock. So most of them kind of follow that structure. Sometimes Kids Camp varies from that a little bit, where you might have like a mini field trip in the morning and then a bigger field trip in the afternoon. And that's, again, because we like to break up the content for kids and make it as activity-based as possible. But generally, that's the structure that you're looking at. The other exception to the structure is that on day 1, And on day 5, we kind of have like a special schedule. And that's because on day 1, it's the first day of camp. So in the morning, you have to dedicate some time to just kind of do like the welcome. And in terms of the welcome, the camp directors in all cities usually do that kind of camp-wide, like welcome everybody, let's go through some house rules, introduce the staff. You kind of have to knock that out of the way, but that obviously is going to take up some time in terms of your day 1 schedule. And then on the last day, on day 5, we have a special end of week exhibit that we hold every Friday afternoon. So that's just a really great opportunity for campers' family and friends to come out, kind of check out the work that they've been doing. But again, that's going to kind of eat into your schedule as well. So day 1 is a little special, day 5 is a little special, but other than that, you're doing lesson in the morning, lunch, and then a major kind of big field trip. Okay. So so let's talk about day 1. So day 1, staff arrive at about 8 o'clock, as you can see here. They come nice and early to prep and kind of prepare their classroom, make sure they have all their materials for the day. And around between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, that's when campers are going to start to arrive. So in every city, you'll be in your main room or your main space. So that could change. Here in Toronto, we're in the lounge. So in the lounge, campers come, and we kind of have like a registration period. So that's when they arrive, they get welcomed, they might have to check in with administration. And then at about 9 o'clock, right on the dot, as soon as we can, that's when our introductions start. So in every city, the camp director is going to come up, again, do a welcome presentation, go through some rules. And then the whole camp, so it could be, all the sessions that are running, go outside and participate in what we call Photo Olympics. So Photo Olympics is just this really special kind of like welcome game that the whole camp gets to participate in. They get to kind of challenge and compete against one another. It's basically a whole bunch of outdoor photography related challenges that they get to compete in teams. And when you guys have your camp orientation week, your camp-wide orientation, that's when you'll go through some of the details of Photo Olympics. But Photo Olympics takes you to about 10 o'clock, or once you kind of come back, it could be anywhere between 10 and 10:30. So that's when you actually start teaching on day 1. What are you teaching on day 1? You're going to be teaching storytelling. That's kind of the main theme for day 1. Yeah. So we'll go through the slides of that. The big activity that you get to do in the morning to kind of get them thinking in this storytelling mode is Tableau. So if you've ever done drama class or something like that before, Tableau is basically like an activity where they have to act out certain scenes without words or motion. In this case, they're taking photographs in order to get a message or story across. So it's a really great activity there. There is a game and washroom break that takes place from 11:15 to 11:30, just a nice way to kind of break up the morning. If kids want to have a snack, they can do it then as well. And then you continue on with your lecture from 11:30 until 12. And the 11:30 to 12, in terms of the lecture topics, you're going to be going through some of the review of technical concepts that the campers would have learned in Kids Camp 1. So you're going to be reviewing aperture, depth of field. You're also going to be reviewing shutter speed and freezing and blurring of motion with the campers. So this will kind of get them back in that mode of using their shutter priority and their aperture priority modes. So then their activity, which will take them to lunch, will be shoot for the story. So it's kind of like them being in like a photojournalistic sort of mode. So we give them like an assignment, like, okay, you're going on assignment. In Toronto here, it's to Birdsea Park, which is the dog park with the big dog fountain. And they kind of have like 2 angles for the story that they get to choose. And they have to think about all the technical considerations that you just reviewed with them and how they can use those in order to enhance and tell their story in the park. So that's the main project there. And then you break for lunch. So then lunch goes from 12 until 1, so it's 1 hour, and then you're gonna go on a field trip at about 1 o'clock. So field trip locations, like I said, will vary per city. Here in Toronto, you're gonna go to OCAD and Grange Park. So the assignment that they're gonna be working on is called Toy Story. So their highlight here for their assignment is that they get a random toy. So it could be like anything. It could be a little car, it could be a little figurine, and they have to tell a story with multiple images with that toy. And they'll have some guidance there because these are some of the tips and things that you're gonna cover in the morning lecture. Again, OCAD and Grange Park is the location for Toronto specifically. Other cities, it will be listed in your field trip planner, which will be sent to you as well, okay? And then for every afternoon, you want to aim to come back to the classroom at around 2:45 or 3 o'clock, 2:45 in the afternoon, so that you have time to sort of wrap up so that campers are good to go and good to leave for 3. So always aim to come back a little early. because sometimes you'll have to do things like give them end of day reminders, or, you know, they have to kind of like pack up and grab their backpacks and things like that. So we just want to make sure we always kind of give them about 15 minutes or so. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. And then let's look at day 2. Okay, so day 2. So now there is no that morning registration. So your day 2 teaching is going to start a little earlier. Campers will arrive from 9 until 9:15, and they're going to do an icebreaker. So it could be any sort of welcome sort of game. It could be 2 truths and a lie. It could be Pictionary, any sort of welcome game that you can think of. And then at 9:15, you start teaching. So at 9:15, you are going to do your day 2 lecture. So your day 2 lecture is creative shooting techniques. So now they're learning, you know, just different ways that they can be creative. And one of those things we're going to show them is black and white images. So we talk about when black and white images would be, you know, great to use, show them examples. And then they'll get the opportunity to shoot in black and white as well. So you'll head outside, go on a mini field trip as well, and kind of practice that. And then there will be a game or washroom break again at about 10:15, 10:30. And then day 2 lecture will continue at 10:30. And now you're going to teach them how to do silhouette shots, which is cool. So they'll get an opportunity to practice silhouette shots indoors as well as outside by photographing a partner. And then the very last creative section, so from 11 to 12, is that you're going to do phonography tips with them. So that is so much fun. So yeah, it's showing them how to do cool things with their phones, and their activity is going to be to create like their own meme, like their own meme-worthy sort of photo.
Cute.
Really cute. Yeah, it's really fun for them to get creative. And then lunch goes from 12 until 1. Field trip in the afternoon from 1 until 3 is going to be St. James Garden for here in Toronto. And their activity, though, in all cities is going to be the nature name hunt. So their goal there is for them to basically spell out their name by taking pictures of things that look like the letters. So for an example, yeah, for me to spell Lauren, I'm going to have to look for something that looks like an L, something that looks like an A. And so there's lots of things there in the park that work well. We'll talk about the details. But that's their assignment for the day. And then they come back at 2:45. One thing I'll mention here in terms of the structure is you will notice that we have like scheduled like game and washroom breaks just so for you to remember to kind of take those breaks. But if you need to throw in more, like you're absolutely welcome to. So you don't, you know, have to take it right at 10:15. You can kind of take it whenever, and you can take more than one, that's fine. But we put it in the schedule just to kind of remind you. Okay, and then day 3. All right, so day 3, again, you start at 9 o'clock, do an icebreaker from 9 until 9:15. And then at 9:15, you're going to start with your day 3 lecture. And the day 3 lecture is genres of photography. So now they get to learn more specifically about different types of picture taking. And the first genre that they're going to cover is portraiture. So we go through portraiture tips, and their activity is the whiteboard portraits. So this is when campers have to like stand against a whiteboard and people can like draw stuff around them to kind of tell a story of who they are, which is really fun. And then after that activity, continuing with the portrait theme, is they learn about self-portraits and sort of like the difference between self-portraits and selfies, just as an example. So that's really fun for them. And then they get to do some self-portraits outside. So we'll talk about the details there too. And then you go for a game and washroom break at 11. And then the genres continue. So from 11:15 to 12, that's when they learn about pet photography a little bit. So in pet photography, this section here, we really just kind of touch on the basics of what pet photography is. As you know, another program that we run here is the Nature and Animals program, which some of you might be teaching as well. And yeah, so we don't get into full detail here, but it's kind of just like a nice little teaser. And what's awesome is, you know, if you see students that are really interested in this topic, you can tell them, hey, we have this other camp too if you really love photographing animals. And so we go through tips there, and then we'll walk them over to Birdsea Park again because there's just so many dogs there, and even the fountain itself, and now they can kind of practice some of the tips that they know. Then we go for lunch again from 12 until 1, and then from 1 o'clock to 2:45, they're going to go on field trip, and today's field trip is Harbourfront in Toronto. So you get to walk into the Harbourfront, and their assignment is going to be Copycat. So the Copycat project basically is a list of all the different types of photography that you've talked about so far, and maybe even some extras. And their goal is to see like how many of those can they recreate. So just, you know, landscape might be on there, architecture, pet photography, a portrait, all those things will kind of be on the list. It's almost like a scavenger hunt in a way, sort of to find a certain type of shot. And then day 4, So again, icebreaker from 9 and 9 to 9:15. And then day 4 lecture is just continuing again with genres of photography. It's only a very short lecture on this day. So you're going to be going through still life photography. So it's a very short lecture and activity from 9:15 until 10. So you'll talk about still life shooting, and then they'll actually get a chance to shoot a product or like an object on their own. And the reason that the lesson is shorter on day 4 is because we need to fit in our photo critique. So every camp has a photo critique, and it always happens on day 4. And there's a couple reasons that we do photo critique. I mean, one reason is obviously just getting the students to be able to share their work, to talk about their favorite photos from the week. They typically, depending on the camp size, will bring in anywhere between 5 to 10 images for photo critique. And yeah, they'll basically just show and present their images to the rest of the group. You'll kind of give them some feedback on, you know, what you think is great about the image, and then areas of improvement. And the other thing is you will help your campers scale down their top 5 or 10 shots to their favorite 3. So those favorite 3 images that you'll help them select end up in our slideshow, which gets played at the end of the week at that exhibit that I was mentioning. So that's why it's really important, and that's why every camp has a photo critique on day 4, is because we need to gather those images to put together the slideshow for the next day. So photo critique will run from 10 until 11. You can take a break from 11 to 11:15, and then you can continue with photo critique from 11:15 until 12 with a little mini lesson in there as well about aspiring young photographers. So we're talking about photographers that are like teenagers, just to give the campers some inspiration. It's really important that you break up your photo critique into 2 sections, because to sit for like an hour straight or 2 hours straight kind of listening to presentations can be a little just tiresome. So it's great to really make sure to do a washroom break as well as a game in between. Then we have lunch from 12 till 1. And then your field trip on day, 4? In Toronto, it's going to be the Brookfield building. So we'll talk about all the details if you've never been there before, but a really great spot with lots of light and lots of arches to shoot. And again, other cities, it'll be listed in your field trip planner. And then day 5, which is the last day of camp, and this one has a little bit of a special schedule as well. So you do an icebreaker game from about 9 to 9:15 or 9:30, and then you're going to go on a big field trip. If you can see my master agenda, you'll see that it's in yellow because it hasn't been quite decided yet. So we need to decide just where that field trip location will be, but in any city, it's going to be like kind of like the grand finale. So I'm trying to think of previous years where we've gone. Just in Kids Camp 1, as an example, they get to go here in Toronto to the Hockey Hall of Fame. So that's kind of like their last kind of end of week activity. So once we fill it in, we will let you know, and it'll be in the field trip planner as well. But that's kind of taking up your whole morning. And then you come back to camp for a lunch from 12 until 1. And then from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, it depends on the week. So we try and book guest speakers to come in. So it'll be like young photographers that the students can really look up to. Sometimes Kids Camp will come and sometimes they won't. Because sometimes the guest speaker doesn't necessarily relate to Kids Camp, like to that age group. And sometimes it's just not the best for them to be sitting for that amount of time. So either you will be invited to listen to the guest speaker, or it'll be outdoor game time. So that's when you'll be able to go here in Toronto, like St. James Park is just a really great place to go. There's lots of space and you can kind of play outdoor games for about an hour or so. And then you want to come back though at the school at 2 o'clock because that's when the exhibit starts. So that's that special end of week kind of get together where parents come and where the slideshows play. It's like a mix and mingle for the campers and the parents and the staff. And then usually exhibit ends at about 3 o'clock and then camp is done for the week. So then, yeah, after all that, we kind of clean up, we reset, and we get ready for the following week. And then that's how camp ends. Yeah. Okay.
Sounds good.
Yeah, so that's the overall just high level week structure so far. Did you have any questions there about any of the days? I know we're just about to get into it more in detail, but just any general questions sort of on structure to start?
No, none so far.
Okay, wonderful. All right, so then we're going to pull up every day's slides, and we're going to go through those one at a time.
Awesome.
Do you see like a PowerPoint presentation in front of you now? Okay, beautiful. So let's go through all this. All right, so Kids Camp 2. So it's creativity continues. That's like the little tagline to it. Okay, so you pull up your day 1 slides, and the first thing to go through with the campers is just an outline, just to say, okay guys, like this is what we have forward to for the whole week. This is what every day is kind of gonna look like. And this is like a chance to really get them like pumped up and excited. So like I said, the overall themes for each day is Monday is storytelling, Tuesday's creative shooting, Wednesday is learning about the genres of photography, Thursday is even more genres of photography plus critique, and then Friday is a big field trip and exhibit. My biggest tip when you're going through this slide here and going through each day is in terms of the big field trip on Friday, leave it as a surprise. So don't tell them exactly where they're going, because the other thing is, you know, sometimes logistically, like, you know, I don't know, 1 week something might be closed, let's say, and instead of going to the Hockey Hall of Fame, we're going somewhere else. So we don't want to promise them Hockey Hall of Fame and then we end up going somewhere else as well. So just kind of keep it as a mystery and leave it as a surprise, but they can know that it's a big field trip. So the next slide that you'll have, and this will be in all presentations that you teach with us, is that you'll have a download your class notes slide. So this is an opportunity, because we're trying to be green and paperless, for students that if they want their notes and a copy of the slides, they can copy down this link or take a picture of it, and they can go and click on it, input the password, and they can download all of their notes. So we don't print anything for the students anymore. This next set of slides here is important to go through. So when your camp director does the big wide camp welcome on Monday morning, there's a couple things that they leave out that you have to cover in your individual groups. And so one of those things is to go through field trip rules. So just so campers know, like, what are the rules when you're out and shooting? What are some things they should remember? So for field trips, we want to visit the bathroom before we leave. That's really important. And that's something that you're going to have to make sure to give time for the students to do, because when you're out on location, walking around the city, there might not be an opportunity to do this. The other thing is to remind them to wear comfortable shoes. Tell them, we're going to be outside for 2 whole hours every day walking around. So you want to be comfortable. You also want to bring a water bottle with water, because it's going to be hot. You also want to make sure that at the end of every day, you charge your batteries and make sure you have enough space on your memory cards. Because the worst thing, and kind of really stress this, the worst thing that can happen is we go out on field trip and you guys can't take pictures because you can't use your camera, or it's too full, right? That's kind of like the worst scenario. And it won't be fun for them. And then the other thing is to remember to bring rain gear, which is just a regular plastic, like grocery bag would be great to wrap your camera in case it rains. And also very important here, apply sunscreen and wear a hat, okay? Very important. And then we do a buddy system here. So as a really quick and easy way for instructors to make sure that they have everybody in their group, we assign everybody to a buddy. So this is something that you should do. You should assign a camper to another camper, and they have to keep an eye out for their buddy. So what we do is when we're walking around on field trip, if you need to do a really quick head count, we say, okay guys, go and high five your buddy. And they have to go and find their partner and high five them. And if somebody doesn't have somebody to high five, then you know that you're missing somebody. So yeah, that's just a really good tool that we use. Safety and emergency. So just in terms of the fire extinguisher, in every city, this is going to be different. I can say that here in Toronto, the fire extinguisher is in the hallway near the boys' bathroom. And the first aid kit will either be in your own classroom with you, or will be in our nook that we call our nook. That's like our storage kind of little area. So it'll be either in those 2 places. And then just remind campers that in the event of an emergency, if something happens, you just kind of have to tell them, guys, in an emergency, listen to me, listen to what I'm saying. We're not going to overcrowd, we're not going to panic. And if I ask you to step away from the incident and gather together as a group, please listen up and kind of do what I ask. We want to stay quiet until the situation's resolved. So just as like a heads up, just in case. And then this is important for each camper to have as well. So just in the event that maybe a camper gets separated from the group and they need to call to say, hey, I'm lost, I can't find my instructor or my class anymore, this is the number that every student wants to have. So in Toronto and Ottawa, it's the same number. It's 416-546-9089. And in Chicago, it's just our long distance or 1-800 number. The thing to note is that in kids camp, not all campers will have a cell phone at that age. So if they don't, then you might want to ask them to write this down. Or here in Toronto, you can grab them a business card as well, which is kept by the front door, and they can put that in their pocket if they need it, okay? And then fire drill. So the last thing to do is kind of just go through fire drill. So you can just tell them that if the fire alarm does go off, that you're going to give the warning and you're going to stand up and you're going to say fire drill. Then the instructor, you're going to say stand. everybody in the room is going to stand and remain silent. They should go and stand next to their buddy, which you've just assigned as well. And then in a single file line, you're going to head out of the nearest exit. So we'll go through all of this during camp-wide orientation as well, because every city is different, but you're going to go out your nearest exit and go to your point of safety, which will be determined during camp orientation as well. And so at this point, what you want to do is you actually want to walk them through it. So you want to practice, you're going to say fire drill, you're going to stay stand, you're going to get everyone to line up, and you're going to walk out the main door to the point of safety just to show them where it is. So you actually can feel free to do this at the beginning of your day, or you can feel free to do it after lunch before you go out on field trip, because you have to exit the building anyway. So either one is up to you.
Right. Okay.
All right, so then storytelling. All right, so this is where we start getting into storytelling. So we get to this slide and say, okay guys, now let's talk about our main theme for the day. So our main theme for the day is going to be storytelling. And there are so many different ways that we can tell a story. So some examples that we see here on this slide, can you guys identify them? We've got, movie theater would be one way to tell a story. We've got written stories, so in books, which we see in the middle. And then very similar to movies, like TV shows. Those are all different ways that we can tell stories. So how do we tell a story? That's what we want to learn today. So especially when it comes to photography, a picture is worth 1,000 words. That's what they say. So pictures can tell a story too, but how do we get our story across without words, which we have in books, and without moving pictures, which we have in movies and with TV? So let's talk about how we can do that. Actually, before we talk about how we can do that, let's look at some examples. So let's look at some examples where we have pictures that are telling stories. And at this point, you really want to open it up to the class and kind of get them to participate and engage as much as possible. And I find the really nice thing about the 8 to 12-year-old age group is they always want to talk about stuff. They always got opinions that they want to vocalize, and that's awesome, right? It creates a really dynamic, sort of energetic sort of environment. So what do you think the story is behind this image? So you can see here, just as a tip, in any of your class slides, you're going to have class notes that can be found at the bottom here, just under the slides. So here, what do you think the story is behind this image? What are some details that you notice? So here they might pick out things like, oh, there's a baby stroller on this streetcar. You can't see anyone's faces because everybody's looking forward. You're sitting at the back of the streetcar. Those might be some of the details that they mention or that you can suggest if they don't notice those things. And then the other thing is, how does this image make you feel, right? Like in terms of mood. Do you feel welcomed in the streetcar? Is it kind of dark? Is it kind of creepy? Those are some of the main points you want to touch on for each example. Another example here. So ask the same questions that we just talked about. Another example here. Another one here. So what you might want to do in terms of your practice is you're really going to practice these slides before you teach, is also just, again, for every example, image example that we have, just on your own, come up with 2 or 3 key talking points that you might want to bring up about each image. Just things you might want to point out to the campers. So just in terms of a story, there are 2 different types of stories that exist. We have fiction and we have nonfiction stories. So what's the difference? Fiction stories, they are based on imaginary events and characters, whereas a nonfiction story is a story based on fact in real life. So what you might want to do is ask the class here, what examples of fiction versus nonfiction stories can you think of? So some examples of nonfiction would be like news stories, the newspaper, things you hear on the radio, right? News type stuff would be nonfiction. Documentaries would be nonfiction too. And then examples of some fiction-based stuff, get them to maybe tell you their favorite movies, their favorite TV shows, their favorite books, all that kind of stuff. And now let's get into the art of storytelling. So when we want to tell a story, what do we have to include? What does every good story have? So the idea now is kind of giving them that general structure of storytelling that they're going to apply when they have to go and shoot their projects. So in terms of a fiction story, that's what we're going to concentrate on today. There should always be characters in a story. There might be some sort of problem or conflict that makes the story interesting. And just in terms of the plot, there's always going to be a beginning, a middle, and then an end to the story. So this is just showing them the structure of the storytelling. So again, beginning, middle, and end. So we can see here, just in terms of that arc of the story, we start by developing our settings and characters. Then they face some sort of problem that they have to face. There's a rising action as they deal with that problem, deal with that conflict until it reaches a climax or a pinnacle point to the story, and then everything starts to kind of wrap up and get settled as the story kind of comes to a close. So again, your beginning, your middle, which is the climax, and then the end there. So then it's really good to give them some examples. So we can look at some movies. And the thing to keep in mind again is just, I don't know how relevant these are gonna be. So just as an example, like Toy Story, I know it's an old movie. So I don't know in terms of age range, like I don't know if 8 to 12-year-olds have seen this movie. So just be ready here, like, okay, if it's not Toy Story, what's another movie that you think that they would have seen, right? So I don't know, Frozen as an example might be a little bit more popular than Toy Story, or Star Wars maybe. Yeah, think of anything that might be relevant and kind of in your mind be ready to go with that, to think of, okay, yeah, what's the beginning of that movie, the middle, and the end of that movie? So just Toy Story as an example, yeah, the settings and the characters get introduced. So you have Woody, the toys, Andy, and the setting is Andy's room or playhouse. The problem is that Buzz and Woody do not get along. That would be the problem. In addition to the beginning is Andy's leaving and Andy gets a new toy. That's sort of like kind of developing the setting as well. Buzz and Woody do not get along is the problem, which leads to the rising action. The climax is when Buzz appears to have died. I don't remember that scene. Have you seen Toy Story?
A long time ago.
A long time ago, me too.
Yeah.
But then Buzz appears to have died at some point in the movie, and that's kind of when like the pinnacle kind of turnaround happens. And then the falling action of when things start to wrap up is Woody and Buzz land safely in the car next to Andy. I think they fall off of like some rocket ship or something. And then the wrap up is that Woody and Buzz now work as a team. So that's just kind of like the general arc of the story. Hunger Games is one that's a little bit more relevant. So here again, the settings and characters. So Katniss, Peeta are the characters. The dystopian sort of future would be the setting. Pan Am and the districts and the capital, those are all the settings. And at the beginning, we're also introduced to the Hunger Games as an event. The problem is that Katniss must participate or volunteers to participate. And the rising action is the training for the Hunger Games. And then when they start, when the games actually start. And then the climax is when Cato, Peeta, and Katniss fight to the death. We're kind of really near the end. Peeta and Katniss win, which is kind of like the wrap up. And then the very ending of the movie is the president isn't happy. So that's kind of how things are happening there. So it's a really good way just to give these guys some like real life examples of stories and when this is happening. So the problem with photography, not the problem or the challenge that we have, is that in one photograph, we're trying to potentially encompass an entire movie or an entire book, right? So we have to just be mindful of what that one image is actually showing and how we're telling our story through that single image. So this is one more example of saying, okay, guys, if we look at this single image, what do you think the story is behind it? And so get them to talk about it now that they know a little bit more about story arc. I know there isn't like a ton of story in this picture, but it's just great to kind of get them to talk about what they think might be the story behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And then we move on to visual storytelling. So, okay, we know that we want to tell a story through images. How do we do that? So the composition is something that's really important to talk about because that can really support the message. What are some of our rules of composition? So this would be where you're kind of reviewing now what's covered in Kids Camp 1. So what are some of our rules of composition? And you can see here in the notes, these are the rules that are covered in Kids Camp 1. Like I said, rule of thirds, simplicity, framing, leading lines, horizon lines is one I forgot to mention earlier, and then angles would be another. So just talk about what those are. So just because I know that some of you aren't teaching Kids Camp 1 specifically. So rule of thirds, we basically teach the idea of not putting our subject in the middle of our frame, moving them off to one side or the other. Simplicity, we teach looking for distractions and eliminating them in the picture. We talk about using natural framing to put around our subject to highlight it as something of importance. So, looking for window frames, door frames to put around our subjects, trees with branches, overhead. Architecture could be used as a natural frame. We talk about leading lines as a way to create a visual path to lead our viewer's eye to our main subject. We talk about horizon lines. So for landscapes, we don't want to put our horizon line in the middle of our frame. We want to put it a little lower or a little higher. And then angles is the last one as well. So trying to find a unique perspective, an original camera angle is the one that we use there. So review all those with them quickly and try and get them to talk as much as possible, right? So if they say, I remember rule of thirds, be like, okay, tell me about it. What is it? How do I use it? And then after all that, we can talk about this image as well. So how does this picture make you feel? So what's kind of the feeling that you get from it? And why do you get that feeling? And lighting could be part of it too. So we don't talk, we touch on lighting a little bit in Kids Camp 1, nothing like crazy. But just talking about the effects of lighting and how that makes you feel could be something you discuss as well. Okay. And then one of the rules that we kind of go even more in depth about, so we talked about what simplicity is, but we talk about how it can really help for storytelling. So simplifying the scene helps your viewer focus on what is most important, helps them to focus on the story or the theme. So how do we keep things or keep images simple? So let's kind of go on to our next slides to talk about that. So one of the ways that we can achieve simplicity, you'll see in the notes there, it says move in close. So we got to remember to move in closer to our subject when we want to focus on it. When we don't want to see everything else that's happening in the scene or the frame, we want to concentrate on the subject. We want to use shallow depth of field. So you can tell these guys, okay guys, you know, if you didn't take Kids Camp 1 with us or you forget what depth of field is, don't worry, we're going to review it in a few slides, but just know that it means that we're blurring out our backgrounds, and that can be a really great way to simplify what the background looks like. And then another really big thing that we can do is we can change our camera angle to get more simplicity. So in this example here, we shot overhead our subject instead of shooting down at our subject or getting down low and shooting at our subject, we got up high. And an overhead angle was really useful here because now we don't see the rest of the messy kitchen, right? We just see the table, we see what we want to see, the food, and that's our focus. So camera angle is a big one. And then we can look at this example and say, what is the main focus of this picture? And I would say that in this picture, it's all about the reflection in the puddle. So how did we get that? Or how does the viewer know that that's the subject? Because of the low camera angle. So again, supporting that idea of camera angle to emphasize the subject. And so angles, now we're getting kind of, it's like our segue from simplicity to angles. So now, yeah, let's talk about angles a little bit more. So in terms of angles, they can completely provide a whole new perspective on a scene. So it can provide a fresh look to a common scene or common space. It's all about where you position yourself. So experiment between a bird's eye view, which is high up, and an ant's eye view, which is low down. And just looking at these two images, we can see the difference there in terms of what we notice and what we see when we change our camera angle. And a low camera angle, just as an option, can make subjects look bigger and more important, larger in size. So a good example here. So it can work for portraits too. What does the low camera angle do to your interpretation of the subject? So here she looks stronger and she looks tougher, you know, from that low angle looking up at her. A high camera angle can also help to make the viewer feel like they are really observing a scene instead of participating in it. So that's kind of the feeling that you're going to get from these different camera angles. So really great example here, right? When we're kind of looking overhead, we feel like observers. We kind of feel like we're up in the clouds watching, not really part of the scene. And then in addition to that, something else that we want to think about now is creating a photo essay. So sometimes to tell a story though, we have to use multiple images instead of just one picture. So we always have that choice. So this would be a great example here of like a little mini series. So we're trying to tell the story and kind of the life of this artist. So we have a detailed shot here of her studio and her space. We have a nice portrait of her. And then we have another shot of her sort of in action, like her kind of painting and a hand shot, which is great. So what types of shots should a photo essay include? So now we're going to go through each example. So you want to start with a lead photo. So the lead photo is the first image in a photo essay, which should really draw the viewer in, draw them into the story and really grab their attention. So just compositionally, trying to use leading lines to visually kind of grab the attention and pull the attention of the viewer into the story is a really good effect. We also want to have the scene setter, or kind of like the establishing wide angle shot would be another way to think of it. So this is typically a wide angle image that sets the stage for the story. So it gives the viewer a sense of the environment, which we see here. So the photo examples here are all kind of in the same theme of like Chinatown, kind of like at night, just so you know, that's what the examples are going to pull up. So here's another, the portrait. So a photo essay should include a portrait if people are involved, and a portrait shot will help introduce the viewer to the subjects of the story or the characters of the story. It'll also give the viewer somebody that they can try and relate or connect to. It's a way to humanize the story as well. And then we also want to have detail shots in our photo essay. So include as many detail shots as you like. This is your opportunity to draw your viewers' attention to little but important details that may be lost in other images. So always try and shoot details that support the story that you're thinking about. And then the action. So having an action shot in any photo essay is going to make it way more dynamic and more interesting. It basically gives some energy to the essay and adds movement to images that would otherwise be still as well. So kind of making it a little more dynamic. And then the clincher is kind of how we end the photo essay. So the last image in your essay should be something like a closing remark. So make it powerful and make it impactful. Make it, if possible, maybe even summarize, the whole story as a whole. So now that they've gone through kind of everything that they need to include in a story, whether they're telling it in one image or multiple images, we now want to get them to do the Tableau activity. So Tableau, basically a group of models or motionless figures representing a scene or a story. So their first challenge is in small groups. Their team is going to get a secret story. So they need to keep it a secret or surprise story. And so that's something else that will be sent to you is a list of Tableau scenes. So it's just a handout that you'll have as an instructor. You can go around and kind of whisper and tell each group, okay, this is the scene that you guys are getting. Their goal is to shoot 5 images with their group, acting out the story in order to convey the message. So just to give you some examples, like some of the situations are, I think like one of them is like cooking a new recipe is like the situation. One of them is like awkward family dinner or something like that. Another one is your first day of school. So those are just some examples of the type of situations they might be in. So just remind them, don't forget to have a beginning, middle, and an end. And even when they're shooting the pictures, they can remember that idea of like the action shot, the detail shot, the close-up, the establishing. You can kind of give them some recommendations there. And then when they're done shooting that first round, you're going to get everybody's images and you're going to show them on the projector. So this might mean just getting the memory cards from each camper. So actually what you want to do then when you're assigning this activity is you want to tell everybody in each group to choose and assign one photographer so that they're taking all the pictures on just one camera, so that when you go to present, you just take that one memory card from that one person, plug it into your computer, find their 5 images that they want to show, and then you can get the rest of the group to kind of guess, what story do you think is happening here? That'd be fun. So in terms of Tableau, Tableau is literally done with people with no props on a white background. So just like this example that we saw here, that's Tableau. So to kind of give them another challenge or make it a little bit more interesting, we're gonna get them to do Tableau now round 2. Now they get to use props. So how are things gonna change? So now you can use, we'll have a prop box that's available and they can pull different props out of there. But even just using like furniture, they'll be able to use chairs, they can shoot at a desk, things like that. Whereas before, it's not even furniture. It literally is just them on a background. So now this will kind of help them tell their story across a little bit more. Again, once they're done, you'll share the images. Again, it'll be 5 shots in total. And I'm really curious to see, it'll be interesting to see if it's easier for them to guess the scenes when there's props involved as opposed to no props. I'll be really curious to find that out. Okay, so then after Tableau, the next section will be how to tell a story in terms of your technical considerations. So reminding them that, you know what, the technical choices that you make can really help to tell your story too. So things like your depth of field and your focus points, things like freezing and blurring of motion, all these creative technical controls can impact what a story really looks like in a photo. So as review, so now you're reviewing concepts that are taught in Kids Camp 1. But depth of field is going to be the first one. So if reminding them, okay guys, do you guys remember what depth of field is? So kind of ask them first. And if they don't remember, your summary or explanation would be depth of field controls the focus in our photos or the amount of our picture that's sharp. So if I want to control my depth of field, what camera setting do I have to use? What mode, shooting mode? Do I want to shoot in aperture priority or do I want to shoot in shutter priority? And hopefully they're going to guess aperture priority. So then once I set my camera to aperture priority, do you guys remember the difference between shallow depth of field and wide depth of field? So you can look at the 2 images and say which one's shallow, which one's wide. The one on the left is shallow, the one on the right is wide. And then we can talk about how we achieve that. So how do you get shallow depth of field? So for shallow depth of field, so this is a question that you're asking the group. How do we get shallow depth of field, guys? We know that we have to move our f-stop number, but how do we move it? What kind of number gives me shallow depth of field? So hopefully they say smaller number, larger aperture, that's how we're gonna get shallow depth of field. Okay, what about, oops, I just realized this slide. You know what, I'm gonna change it right now. This should say wide depth of field. So how do we get wide depth of field? We're gonna get wide depth of field by doing the opposite. We're choosing our bigger f-stop number. All right, great. And then what about our next creative control? Shutter speed. You guys remember what the shutter speed is? Again, shutter speed is the shutter, the curtain in the back of our camera. We can control how fast or how slow that curtain's gonna open and close. So we use shutter speed to freeze or blur motion. Which mode do we use? Shutter priority this time. And how do you get frozen motion? So for frozen motion, we wanna use the fast shutter speed. How do we get blurred motion? We wanna use the slow shutter speed. So any opportunity you kind of get to, ask questions, ask the group to answer questions, that's really going to make this lecture as hands-on and as engaging as possible. So now that you've reviewed the technical settings, your other activity is to shoot for the story. So just like a photojournalist would, campers are going to receive a nonfiction story that they have to tell through 3 images. Remember the technical tips that we just covered, because that'll help, and we're going to come back and review the images that you shoot. So what's your assignment? Your assignment is to tell the story of Birdsea Park. So here in Toronto, that's where you're gonna go to. Chicago, you guys are gonna have to think about it a little differently. It's the same assignment, but you're gonna have to think about the location, and then you're gonna have to think about what that activity is gonna be. And Chicago and other locations, you will have the opportunity to do some field trip planning in your camp orientation week, just so you know. But here in Toronto, it's set, so it is Birdsea Park, and the assignment is the park is a great place for people. The park is a great place for pets. So they have to choose one angle and again, shoot 3 images to support it. Okay, and then when you come back, if you have time, this would be a great chance to kind of show some of the campers. They can volunteer, whoever wants to show the pictures that they took, just to kind of get everybody excited and inspired. However, if you do run short on time and you can't complete this in the morning, totally fine. It's something that you could do after lunch. It could even be something that you start day 2 off with. You could say, okay guys, remember how we took some pictures yesterday? Let's kind of look at some examples, whoever wants to share. That could be a good opportunity here. So not set, very flexible. Lunch, so we just show a little picture for them, a little meme. We go from lunch from 12 until 1. And then our field trip activities. So the field trip on day 1 is going to be Toy Story. So in terms of Toy Story, every camper basically is going to get a small toy to shoot. They must tell a story about that toy in 10 images. So they can come up with the story, they can come up with the conflict, they can come up with all that, but it has to be done in 10 images. So the story can be whatever you like, but remember your images must include the following: a beginning, a middle, and then an end. So just review that very quickly with them. So every camper will get a toy. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of any like logistical things with kind of running activities. That's the most important thing to always think about with any activity or demo that you're running. It's just like logistically, like how is this gonna work? Like, yeah, should they work in teams? Should they work solo? So I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head. I mean, it's pretty straightforward here. I would give every camper their toy, obviously before you go out for a field trip. I would maybe even hand out the toys or assign like what toy everybody's gonna have before lunch. So if they wanna think over lunch break of like the story that they wanna tell, so it's kind of not on the spot, you could do that. Make sure that nobody loses their toy, make sure that we get them all back. That would be important too. Yeah. Yeah, so 10 images. So just on field trip, yeah, I always check in with them, always make sure that they're shooting, remind them as well about switching between shutter and aperture priority, depending on, the type of story they're trying to tell. But I can imagine here that primarily they're gonna shoot an aperture priority. I mean, I don't think they're gonna be shooting too many sort of action shots with the toys. It'll be more like depth of field.
Yeah.
And so here's some examples. So what's the story here? Maybe seems a little bit more boring at first, a little more straightforward. This could maybe be at the beginning or the end of the story, maybe the beginning to kind of show the subject, but how could we make this more interesting? So maybe shooting on a different angle, maybe getting in closer, including more in the scene could help too. This is an example of the Lego World one that they shoot in Kids Camp 1. So this is a much better example. This story makes us ask questions, right? Like, how did he get there? Why is this guy buried? The hand coming out of the sand, the handcuffs, even like the little wood thing. Like, I'm not sure what that's supposed to be. Like, is it a grave that he's digging out of? Was he chained to that? Is he breaking away? So there's lots of questions here, so it's intriguing, and that's something that we want to aim for. And then in addition to that, these are things that could be like a challenge for them to include in their story. So every story also needs to include a tree, something red, a person, a bird's eye shot, and an ant's eye shot. Those could be some examples to kind of just get them inspired, kind of have like this checklist as an extra set of challenges. And then you're gonna go out on field trip, and then you're gonna come back at 2:45, and these are your end of day reminders. So you're gonna see this at the end of every slide. Charge your batteries to remember to do that. Clear your memory card. We're gonna move these pictures down here. But just in terms of reminders, remember water and sunscreen for tomorrow. Very important.
Oh, quick question.
Yeah.
So for their memory cards, how are they processing their own images, or do we take them all and keep them?
That's a really good question. They are going to be processing everything themselves.
Okay.
So their cameras and their memory cards, in terms of the people that, sorry, let me start again. When campers come to camp with their own cameras, their cameras go home with them at the end of the day, their memory cards go home with them at the end of every day. So what you might want to tell those campers is, hey guys, don't forget your memory card, make sure you download all your pictures from today, right? Copy them over to your computer so that you have them and know that they're safe. If there's anybody in your group that has a rental camera or a loaner camera, the camera does not go home with them at the end of the day. They get a memory card for the week that they actually get to keep. So that's kind of included in their rental fee. And in terms of that memory card, it is up to you. So you could do it two ways. Either they take the memory card home with them every day and bring it back, which isn't actually the best option. I'm going to lean towards you keep the memory card in their loaner camera, which will have a number on it. So it'll be assigned to that camper. And so every morning when you come in, you'll be like, okay, Lauren's got loaner camera 8, and I know that her memory card is safely in there. I put it back there at the end of every day. And then at the very end of the week, then you'll give them their memory card to take home with them.
Gotcha.
Yeah, good question. Any other questions about day one?
No, it's very clear. It looks like fun.
Okay, good, awesome. All right, so then let's close this one up. And I'm gonna open up Kids Camp Day 2. So this is really good for you to see. You can still see my screen, right? With all the, yeah. So this is what you'll see on the Google Drive. All your lectures will be in one folder together.
Okay.
We're gonna open up Day 2. All right. So Kids Camp Day 2. All right, so our schedule again, we've crossed off storytelling. Now we're into creative shooting. So creative shooting techniques. Can you guys name some examples and why do we use them? So this would be where you want to remind them of what they learned in Kids Camp 1. So in Kids Camp 1, in terms of creating shooting techniques, they learn panning, they learn zooming. And so when I say zooming, sometimes people think, oh, that just means like zooming in and out with your lens. But zooming is actually the shooting technique where you shoot and zoom at the same time. I don't know if anyone's ever experimented with that before, but it's a really cool creative example where you set your camera to a slow shutter speed, you shoot and zoom the lens while the shutter is open essentially, and you end up getting these really like streaked sort of images, like these lines. It's really, really cool. And then other shooting techniques that are creative would be the shallow and wide depth of field, which we just talked about yesterday, a good review there. And then the freezing and blurring of motion, which you talked about on day 1 as well. So in addition to those, let's kind of give you guys some new creative shooting techniques. Let's talk about black and white images. So black and white images are really useful and powerful images that we can shoot. And one of the reasons that we might choose to shoot a black and white image is because it creates less distraction in the image. So when we don't have color kind of getting in the way, you know, everything sort of goes together and kind of matches one another. So it's a little less distracting. And then just some examples. Really awesome black and white shots. I love this example because yeah, like a city, it's busy. There's lots of color, right? Lots of lights. But when everything's black and white, it all kind of simplifies.
Yeah.
Black and white images also force us to see light differently. So we see more contrast. We see a bigger difference between dark and light. So showing them some really beautiful examples here. And again, with any examples, ask them, what do you guys like about this shot? What don't you like about this shot? What would you do differently? Kind of get them talking about it. I love this example, so good.
Yeah, that's so fun.
Right, just in terms of showing that really awesome like light as it's through the bridge. Black and white also emphasizes texture, pattern, and line. So showing some great examples of line. This is a great example of pattern shooting into like a reflective surface. Another example of light as well. I would say texture too in this one. Mm-hmm. And then the other great thing about using black and white images is they help to create a timeless effect. You know, when we think of black and white images, we kind of think a little bit of like old photographs. We think of like old film. And the thing about black and white too is just in terms of like a portrait as an example, you know, it doesn't age itself as quickly. You know, what people wear sometimes can really be a giveaway to when that photograph was taken. But again, without color, it's a little bit harder to tell. So we kind of get that classic nostalgic look. And so now the question is, how do we shoot in black and white? So we know what it is, we know why we might want to use it, but then how do we actually do it? So on the camera, so we have two options. Either on the camera, we can shoot in black and white, or we can convert it in editing. So let's walk through how we can shoot in black and white on the camera. So what we need to find is picture style, or we need to find picture style, and we need to select monochrome. So the majority of campers that you're probably gonna get are gonna have Canon cameras. That tends to be kind of the popular Canon Rebels. On a Canon Rebel camera, what you're looking for is picture style. You might have to hit menu, scroll through until you see picture style, which you see on the left here. And then instead of standard, you might want to go to monochrome. On the Canon Rebels as well, the picture style, if there's a quick button on the back of the camera, there's a little set or OK button. The symbol that's just below it, it kind of looks like a bunch of white rectangles in like a fan. That's your picture style button as well. So you can push that and also select monochrome that way. On a Nikon camera, you're looking for picture control, and it is most likely in the back menu. You can see here in this little thumbnail, you go to the camera menu and it'll be an option there. You again want monochrome. The other option for black and white is that we, instead of shooting in black and white, we convert to black and white instead. And we can do this using editing. So it's very simple. We can do it in Lightroom, or we can do it in Photoshop. But a lot of professionals, just so you know, like to shoot in color and convert to black and white, because it gives you the ability to kind of have a lot more control over what the black and white picture looks like. So the two examples here just to show you the difference, the major difference between black and white and color. So now we're gonna try it. So now that we've set our cameras to shoot in black and white, we're gonna get up and we're gonna shoot some black and white images. So it's up to you here. You can do it in the classroom if you think there's enough interesting sort of objects and enough good light in the room. However, you know, with Kids Camp especially, any opportunity to get outside and do like a little bit of a mini field trip, maybe even just walk around the building where you are to shoot some black and white photos would be good practice. The next set of creative techniques would be shooting silhouette shots. So here we talk about what a silhouette is. So it's when we photograph and the person is completely in shadow. And it's a really great way to emphasize shape and form in a very simple way, because you don't have details on our subject anymore. So in order to shoot a silhouette shot, we have to place our subject in front of a really bright light source. So this could be a window, or if you're outside, it could be the sun. But we're always placing this main light behind the subject. Then, in order to get our subjects really, really dark and in shadow, we want to expose for the background and not the subject. So a couple ways that we can do this. If they're shooting on a semi-automatic mode, right? So aperture shutter priority, they're going to point their camera up at the sky, and they're actually going to click and hold down their auto exposure lock button. So that starts to get a little confusing. So the auto exposure lock button, it's the AEL button on a Nikon camera that's right beside the viewfinder. And on a Canon camera, it's a little like asterisk or star symbol that's on like the top right-hand corner. That's one way to do it. The other way to do it, if you don't want them to hold down that button, is they can just point their camera at the scene, and sometimes it'll kind of do it on its own. But if it doesn't do it on its own, they can use exposure compensation to make the picture darker. So in order to make the picture darker on a Canon camera, exposure compensation in a semi-automatic mode is the AV plus or minus button. You click and hold down that AV plus or minus button, and the light meter will light up on the back, and you move the wheel until the light meter goes into the minus side. That's underexposing. On a Nikon camera, it's also a plus or minus button that you hold down on the top of the camera body. And on the display screen, a number will show up, and you want to make that number a minus number to darken the image. So that's probably, there's two ways, again, to do it, but I think that the exposure compensation might be the simpler method, depending on whatever you feel comfortable with. Okay. So because our background's so bright, when we get the background properly exposed, the subject's going to come out really, really underexposed. And then we're just going to look at some examples. Again, get the campers to talk about them, what they like and what they don't like. And then as an extra tip, when we're shooting silhouettes, remember that your subject will be reduced to shape and form. So it's really important that the subject is easy to read. So what does that mean? It means that if you're shooting people, make sure people spread out their arms and their legs. Otherwise, if your hands are all together and you're standing straight up, you're just gonna look like a blob in the photo, right? So as much separation as possible in the picture is gonna make for a more successful silhouette. Okay, and now they're gonna try it. So my advice here would be to split the group into 2 groups. So in Kids Camp 2, you're always gonna have a counselor, a camp counselor that's helping you. So in this situation, just because there might not be enough windows in your space to do this, is you're gonna split the team into 2 groups. The counselor will stay inside and help students get a silhouette shot against a window, and then the instructor will take a group maybe just outside to like the front of the building to try and get a silhouette shot outdoors. So yeah, so we can try that. Remember that if you're trying to get a silhouette outdoors, it's kind of hard because you're gonna be going out at like 11 o'clock in the morning. So the sun's gonna be right overhead. Yeah. So what you need to look for outside is there a place where a student or a subject can stand in shade and then there's bright sunlight behind them. So they could stand in like the shade of a building and then the rest of the street be really, really bright. Sometimes you can create a silhouette that way, but yeah, you just gotta be careful with the lighting there. And then once you kind of maybe take like 10 minutes to do that, then you're gonna switch. So then the outdoor group gets to go inside, the inside group gets to go outside. Otherwise, if your room is big enough for everybody to do it once, you have enough windows, then do it all together inside and then all together outside. Okay, and then the very last section here is phonography. So just in terms of phonography, just talking a little bit about why it's so popular. So phone photography is just increasingly getting more and more popular these days. And definitely I think the photo-based apps are you know, increasing that popularity. Mm-hmm. So maybe talking just a little bit about Instagram, kind of like, okay guys, who here has Instagram? Kind of just curious for us to know. And then why is phonography so important? So phonography is just way more, popular. Phonography is just way more popular now because it's a lot more convenient than using a digital camera. Mm-hmm. So it's smaller, it's lighter, you always have it with you, and it's just really easy point and shoot kind of setup. And so here we teach them how on their phones they can actually control exposure. So do you shoot on an iPhone or another type of phone?
I have an iPhone.
You have an iPhone. Okay, great. So that example is the one that you see here. So showing them that how if they tap on the screen on their subject, they'll see a little square and a little sun symbol. And then if they take their finger and drag it up or down anywhere on the screen, they can control how bright and how dark that photo is. So that's a really great extra tip. And just remember though that you might have some Samsung and Android users. So for them, a lot of the options that you talk about in phonography are in their options menu. So for a lot of Samsung and Android users, they have to open up the phone, they have to click on that little cog or wheel that says that is your options, and then it brings up this whole menu that has kind of like everything in there. So in terms of controlling exposure, they might have an option called exposure value that'll be in that menu. Otherwise, a lot of the newer Samsungs and Androids actually work exactly the same as iPhone. So they just tap and they can drag their finger up or down. So taking the picture, so something that you might not know is that the volume keys on the side of your phone can take the picture as well. So showing them how they can hold the camera, hold their phone sideways if they need to, and push the little volume key at the very top so they can use 2 hands and be extra steady as opposed to trying to, you know, touch your kind of camera and maybe move it a little bit by trying to hit the button on the actual screen. And that if they plug in their headphones, and the headphones, if they're older, and have the volume key, that'll act as a remote trigger as well. There you go. And then we talk about panoramas. So just talking a little bit about the panorama function and what do we use it for. It's really great for wide angle scenes, especially landscapes, and just kind of walk them through how to use the panorama in case they've never tried it. So the panorama, we launch on the phone, we touch our picture taking button down on the bottom of the screen, and then we move our phone in the direction of the picture that we want to take, what we want to capture. And then when we're done, we hit our picture taking button down again. That's a normal way to use it. The advanced way to use it, this is just describing it on a Samsung, it's the same. They just move a whole window. But the advanced way to use it is we teach them how to do this. And this is really cool. So it's the idea that you can take multiple pictures of the same person in a single shot. So really, really fun. So in order for this, I really recommend that if you haven't done any of these things, especially these phonography things, because some of them we just don't use on a daily basis, really make sure that you practice on your own before you teach the class so that you have a feel for how it's supposed to work. So here with this example, what happens is the photographer has a friend that stands in front of them. They start taking the panorama, and so they move their phone to capture the person, and then when on their screen they don't see that person standing there anymore, the person gets up, runs behind them, goes into a second position. The photographer keeps moving their phone to capture them in the second position, and then when they're done, then they hit their picture taking button down again. So it's all about running out of the frame and around the photographer to get into the second spot.
Right, makes sense.
And so what you want to do here is after you teach it, you're going to give them the opportunity to try it. And then out of focus shots would be the next one. So there might be times for creative reasons that we want to take a picture that's actually not sharp. We want to take it out of focus. Excuse me. So in order for us to do this, we have to lock our focus on something that's close, and then we need to take a picture of something that's far away. So in order to do this, I would point my camera like really close maybe to my keyboard. I would take my finger and I'd hold it down on the screen on the subject for like a few seconds until the AEAF lock warning, that yellow warning that we see here, shows up at the top of the screen. When that happens, then you take your phone and you point it at something that's far away, and the thing that's far away will be out of focus because the focus will be locked on something very, very close. The important thing to remember here that can get tricky sometimes with iPhones is if you lock your focus on something that's close and then you go and you point your phone at something that's far away and the campers are like, oh, it doesn't look like it's out of focus. It might mean that they weren't locking their focus on something that was close enough. So then they have to move even closer and then try it again. And also as a note, some of the older Samsungs and Androids, you can't do this on those phones. Yeah, just an example. So we can take these really cool kind of artistic photos. And another reason that we take out of focus photos is to get an effect called bokeh. So bokeh is the effect that we get when we shoot light sources that fall out of focus. We get these big soft circles of glowing light instead. So you may have seen images that look like this before. It's a really great technique to do around the holidays, a really great technique to do out in the city at night as an example. And so it's the same kind of steps. So for bokeh, we tap on something that's light in the foreground. We hold our finger down until we get that warning. Then we point our camera at lights that need to be far away from us. And the other extra tip here is that zooming in with your two fingers can really help to make those circles as big and as soft as possible. So always zoom in here too. And then you're gonna try it. So in terms of logistics here, so for this, demo, you're going to need Christmas lights, which we have. So every city should have a set of Christmas lights. Here in Toronto, they're actually like taped onto Bristol boards. So you just pull the whole board, it's got Christmas lights all taped on it, and then you plug it in. So again, these are all things, knowing that this is going to come up, things that you would have prepped in the morning, right? So you've got your boards all set up, you're going to plug them in, and now you're going to demo this with the kids for them to try. Another lunch laugh. And then a field trip for the afternoon. So the field trip here, it's gonna be focusing on the nature name hunt. So go around finding twigs and leaves and spell your name and take a picture, or try and find things that are already existing that look like your name. So just as a tip, here in Toronto, we go to St. James Cathedral and Gardens. There's a lot of like fences in that neighborhood, like wrought iron kind of fences that have different patterns. They could be good for like straight lines like I's or T's. The archways on St. James Cathedral could be really great for the letter A. And even if they want to, I mean, they could shoot maybe like part of like signs even. Like if it was somebody who had a P in their name and they saw like a green P sign, they could shoot that too. But they're just trying to spell out their name here. And then another field trip activity, it's listed here, but you can do it before, is that idea of taking a meme-worthy photo. So that could be something maybe they even shoot on their phones as opposed to their cameras. But the idea of you could add text to the meme, what would the text be? So that could be something just fun to share and kind of do with the group as well afterward. So just some examples of memes. Little gerbil, so cute. From The Office.
Yeah.
Okay, so that you would show all of that before you head out, and then when you come back again, this would be your end of day, whoops, reminder. Let me just move this. The pictures are in the way. Sometimes Google Drive likes to move things around a little bit, but that looks good, yeah. Okay, so end of day reminders. So that's day 2. Did you have any questions about day 2 or any questions about the activities?
No, looks awesome again.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so day 3, moving along. So day 3, all right, we crossed off storytelling, we crossed off creative shooting. Now we're learning about the genres of photography. So what are some types of photography that you guys can think of? So this would be a really great way just for them to get talking and brainstorming. And this might be a really nice chance to like use the whiteboard. So I'm not sure if you've had a chance to watch the teaching tips video yet that was sent to you. Yeah, okay, great, yeah. In that lesson, it really gives you some pointers of like kind of work in the classroom a little bit, you know, to kind of keep things engaging. So, you know, any opportunity you get to sort of draw something out on the whiteboard or have them even draw it out would be great, just to mix it up a little bit. And so here you can get them to almost do like maybe like a mind map of like genres of photography, like food photography, street photography, pet photography, get them to list out as many as possible. And then talk about the ones that we're going to focus on today. So some of the ones we're going to focus on today, first of all, is we're going to start with portraiture. So portraiture is the idea of taking pictures of people, and it really focuses on capturing the essence of a person. Usually we want to emphasize the subject's eyes and face because that's what tells the story of that person. That's really the identity, focuses on the eyes. Yeah, so that's what we want to kind of think about. And to give them some examples. So Annie Leibovitz is a really famous portrait photographer. He shoots lots of really awesome magazine spreads for Vogue. She's been doing it for a really long time. And one thing, actually, I'm just gonna make a note to add here, if I can find, is maybe a little YouTube link. So like a little video clip would be really good. And that's actually something just for you to keep in mind too, you know, however prepared as you can be in terms of having, you know, maybe like a short list of obviously camp appropriate, but YouTube videos that are relating to the topic that you're teaching. That could be really great just to have that in your pocket so that if you need to mix things up or kind of take a little bit of a break, you can show them a really great example.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there is some documentary. I know there's a documentary about Annie Leibovitz, so if we could find a clip of that, that'd be great to show here too. So I'll have a look.
Yeah.
And if there are any links of anything that I'm adding, like for if I want you to show a website or if I want you to show a video, again, the link will be just in the speaker notes at the bottom, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so then some quick tips for shooting portraits. So we always want to try and shoot at our subject's eye level. We want our camera to match the same eye level as our subject. So when our viewer is looking at that portrait, they're looking our subject directly in the eye. Kind of just makes for a more powerful image or a more powerful portrait. If you don't want to shoot low down or get down low at a subject and shoot up, because then you're going to be like shooting up their nose and like looking at their chin, and that never is nice. So if you do have to go any other perspective, then slightly above could work as well. We really want to watch our backgrounds when we're photographing people. We talked about simplicity already, but we want to remove distracting objects so that the focus is on them. So this is a really good case of lamp pole coming out of the head, never flattering, never good. Don't want that. We also want to move in close to our subject. So don't be afraid to have the subject's face really fill the frame. Here you can see that we're kind of cropped into the forehead, right? That's okay if we're doing a close-up. And don't be afraid to turn your camera vertical as well, right? So a lot of the time people have a tendency just to shoot this way because the camera kind of comes this way. But what if we turn the camera sideways instead? It could be really great for portraits. You just want to look and decide what you want to emphasize more in the image. So an example here, this is a portrait of a person for sure, but because we shot it horizontal and a little further away, you know, we kind of don't know, is she the focus? Is the car the focus? Is the house the focus? Versus moving in close, getting tighter, and going vertical. It's a little bit more clear now, at least what the main subject is, less compete. And then we also want to be creative and shoot more candid, less posed images. So capture moments and try and think outside of the box. So how do we do that? So there's a picture here of a kid because it's really great for little kids because little kids don't sit still. They're always moving around. So they're really great subjects to shoot candidly. And then this is just showing like some extra kind of ideas of things that we can do for creative portraits. So adding like another level to the portrait, adding like window blinds as an example, just to kind of visually break it up a bit, but the focus is still on the eyes. Shooting through a window pane that has water on it. That's a really good one too. Whiteboard portrait. So, okay, this is the activity now. I know it says chalkboard, which shows a chalkboard, but we don't have chalkboards. We only have whiteboards. So it's going to be a whiteboard portrait activity. So yeah, this is the idea that campers get to think about maybe what they want to draw on the board that's going to interact with them, and then they can somehow interact with it. And it should be the thing that they're drawing, something that represents who they are. So in these portraits here, I mean, this guy obviously looks like science and music. This person, yeah, loves music as well. Maybe loves like the country and the mountains. Maybe that's like where she comes from. I really love the headphones here being like perfectly drawn around her, which is cool. Yeah. This one's really clever where he's holding his hands behind his back, showing the muscles. Very cool. Okay, so they're gonna go, and now that you've shown the examples, they go and they do the activity. So it'll say in the schedule, like you kind of have to gauge like how much time to give them. But then after that, you're gonna come back, and then the next section of portraiture is gonna be self-portraits. So what is a self-portrait? It shows a representation of the artist. It's a photo self-portrait is taken by the photographer themselves. And there's lots of ways that we can do that. So this one example here, we're shooting our reflection, but we can also use things like tripods as an example, so we can be hands-free. But just in terms of a self-portrait, how does it differ than a selfie, just as an example? So self-portraits, they're intentional, they're planned and thought out. They should show something about the subject's personality and identity as well. So just like a little bit more substantial, I guess, the self-portrait. So how do we take a self-portrait? So one of the things we can do is we can use the self-timer mode on the camera, and we can put the camera on a tripod as well, or a surface, to take a picture of yourself. So this is where you're gonna show them where that self-timer is. So on a Canon camera, it's gonna be, again, around that set or okay button on the back of the camera body. It's the button that looks like a whole bunch of little squares on it. And on a Nikon camera, it can be in lots of different places. You might have to hit the back menu and go through the pencil menu to find it. There might also be a button that looks like a bunch of little squares. Or sometimes on the top of a Nikon camera body, there's like a little wheel that will show S, which is for single shooting, CL, and CH. Those are your burst modes. It stands for continuous low and continuous high, which is very, very fast. So that might be on a little like wheel as well. So yeah, it differs a little bit. Do you shoot Canon or Nikon?
Canon.
Okay, yeah. And that, again, tends to be the more popular one that we get, actually. So.
Yeah.
And then, so we set our camera on a self-timer. We can rest it on a surface, or we can use a tripod. So basically, the tripod is going to allow us to sort of lock in our composition, lock in our camera so that we can be in the image as well. It, yeah, avoids or lets us shoot hands-free to avoid that selfie kind of look where you see your arms in the picture, right? It's more of really just taking a portrait of yourself. So we want it to be intentional. So just in terms of how to use a tripod, you're gonna have a tripod with you there, and now you're kind of demoing how to set it up. So there's a little plate that screws into the bottom of the camera. Once that's attached, it's gonna pop in or click into the top of the tripod, and then we can extend the legs of the tripod to whichever height you might need. And so as you're talking about this, like I'm going through this very, very quickly, but you're actually sort of doing it and showing each stage as you go along.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then just talking a little bit about tripods very quickly here. So there's lots of different tripods that exist. You kind of need to know which tripod is gonna be best for whatever it is you're shooting. Yeah, are you shooting portraits or are you doing landscapes? Do you need to be really high up or low to the ground? And then there's really heavy tripods and there's lighter tripods too. So just know kind of there's all these different options. Mm-hmm. So when you're setting up the tripod, now that we know kind of physically how to get our camera on it and how to raise and lower it, we also want to just consider the placement and the framing of the final shot. So where are you going to place that tripod? So before you place it anywhere, if you're outdoors doing your self-portrait, you got to scan the environment for a spot with good light, so soft shade, not hard sunlight, and obviously an appropriate background that's as simple and as clean as possible, or that again maybe tells some sort of story in terms of your story. So frame up your shot, think of your rules of composition, think of what your background is. And now you can set up the tripod. So unfold the legs all the way, unlock and expand each leg to make the tripod the height that you want it to be. Once your tripod is sturdy and level, then you can place the camera on it and show them again how they're gonna lock that camera into place. And so when you're out in the field doing this, you're really gonna be there kind of helping them along the way. So kind of don't assume that they're like good to go with the tripod once you go through the explanation. You really wanna be there like kind of beside them, pretty much helping them set it up while they're doing the assignment. And then if they don't have a tripod, because in larger groups, you might not have enough tripods for like 12 kids. We don't have 12 tripods here. We might only have like 3 or 4. So grab the ones that you have. But then if you don't have a tripod, you can get creative and find a surface to rest your camera on. So like a park bench, as an example, would be really great. Even being creative and like resting the camera on the ground, and they're like on the ground somehow, that could be really cool too. Or they could shoot a reflection of themselves instead, and then they can hold the camera and it can be in the shot too. And so then you're gonna go outside and you're gonna work on your self-portraits. Actually, before you do that, this would maybe be a great idea to show them examples of just some inspirational self-portraits that are really creative. I know some of them deal a lot with like reflection in mirrors and stuff like that, so that could be cool. And actually here in Toronto, just so you know, we do have a box of mirrors that you can feel free to use. We sometimes use them in some of our other camps as well, but it's not necessary. So in any other city, if you don't have the mirrors, just don't even worry about it, but it could be something fun for them to play around with. And then you're gonna come back, and the last section you're gonna cover before lunch is pet photography. So talking about Charlotte Reeves, because she's like a really awesome pet photographer. You might wanna look her up a little bit and just kind of talk a little bit about what she does before you kind of get into this section. But basically, general tips for pet photography is that we wanna capture animals in their element. So during the shoot, what are some things we can do? So some tips would be put your pet in a very comfy environment. Maybe have them, if they're allowed in your bed or in their own bed. So it's something they're familiar with. Let things unfold naturally. So don't force a scene. Don't really maybe walk in with an idea of what you want the shot to look like in the end. Kind of be open and flexible. Don't use the flash on your camera because that could really upset or scare the animal. And always use good lighting, which is window light. If you're indoors, always works best. Or you want the animal to be in shade if you're outside. And then eliminating distractions is really important. So remove clutter around the pet. Ensure the focus is only on the pet. Try shooting them while they are asleep. That could be a really good technique just to get a little bit of practice.
Mm-hmm.
And then talking about shutter speed is going to be really important for pets. Like, look at this image. So really good if we want to move the shoot outside, we can get the animal now maybe to run around and kind of like jump up. Toss them their favorite toy. That's a really good one to try and get like an action shot. But in these situations where the animal is moving, then it's really important that we use a very fast shutter speed. So give them like a range, right? Like, what does that mean? Like, I don't know, 1/500 might be a really good place to start, 1/1000 for these animals. And remembering that then they have to be in very bright light in order for the shutter speed to work, right? Eyes are really key for any animal. Just it's like shooting a person or doing a portrait. So we want to keep the camera focused on their eyes. And in this case, especially, we want to get down to their eye level and we want to move in close as much as we can too. Okay, so that's pet photography. And then, it's so good. The lunch laughs, I love it. Creative posing gone wrong. The other thing that we can do there is that if you have the opportunity, so I'm not going to put it in the slides, but I'll put it in the notes. If you have time, go out and shoot looking for animals. So that could mean in Toronto, we're gonna go again for Toronto, Birdsea Park with the dog fountain, because there's always animals there, there's always pets there. You're gonna have to kind of take maybe a little bit of the initiative here in the park. If you see maybe someone with a dog and the dog looks friendly, the person looks friendly, you might say, hey, could my campers maybe take a couple shots? Usually people with pets are like, oh my God, yeah, photograph my dog. We know this happen in other camps of ours just like on its own. So usually people are pretty open, but you have to kind of, you're gonna have to be the one to sort of approach them. And I mean, at the end of the day, if the camp is, or if the park is empty, if nobody's there or nobody wants you to photograph their dog, then there's so many dog sculptures as part of the fountain. So they can just treat them as like as pets as well. And in other cities as well, I mean, if you don't have this dog park available or there isn't a space where there are dogs available, even like photographing pigeons. So just as a heads up, in our nature and animals camp, there is like a pigeon challenge where the campers have to go and see who can take the best picture of a pigeon, because it's challenging for sure. But pigeons also shoot really nicely. I don't know if you've ever noticed in the sunlight, they've got like a lot of color in their neck.
Pigeons are beautiful.
Yeah, they always look really good in photos. So in any other city, again, where you don't have a dog park, you could do like a shoot the pigeon challenge. So yeah, you could say, okay guys, let's go out and make, and with kids, you really got to make things a challenge sometimes. It makes them more competitive and more energetic about it. So you can say, okay, we're going to go out and I'm going to start the clock, and it's a 5-minute photo challenge or a 10-minute photo challenge. That's really popular on YouTube right now, actually. So 10-minute photo challenge. I'm going to start the clock. Everybody's got to go and see if they can take the best picture of a pigeon. And then we'll come back and we'll share the images, and the winner will get a prize or something like that. So we always have candy at camp too, which we give away as incentive. So that could be an option too. Let me just make a quick note here. Pigeon challenge. Okay, great. And then it's lunchtime. Yeah, so then we do lunch. And the field trip activity here is going to be copycat. So now that they've learned more about different genres of photography, so far they've covered, it was portraiture, self-portrait, and then pet. And then just some other general types of photography would be architecture, nature, abstract is a really good one. So now their goal on the field trip is to shoot an example of each genre or type. And I believe, again, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure you're going to Harbourfront here in Toronto on this day for this trip.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it sounds familiar. Okay, beauty. Okay, so now you're gonna come back at 2:45 for your end of day reminders, and you'll see there's an additional end of day reminder here. So this is Wednesday in the week, just remember. So tomorrow is day 4, which is Thursday, which is photo critique day. So it's really, really important that you remind your campers that this is happening, because they have to remember to bring in images to share at the photo critique. So how do they bring in their images? So if a camper has their own camera and their own memory card, then you are going to suggest to them that they bring in their top 10, their favorite images, on a USB stick, just so you don't have to go through like their whole memory card in order to do that. And if you have people that have loaner cameras, you can suggest the same thing. So in this situation, on this day, if someone has a loaner camera, you have to remember to give them their memory card today to bring home, right? They're going to bring the memory card home with them. And you might have to here also explain how to even download images, because if someone doesn't have a camera, they might not know.
Yeah.
Before. So just explain. I'm going to put that in the notes too. Yeah. Explain how to download images off of a memory card. So either using a card reader or the SD slot on a computer, which some have and some don't. Okay. In a worst case scenario, if a loaner camper, let's say, doesn't have a card reader and they know that their computer doesn't have an SD slot at home either, then you can help them pick their top 10 images in the morning. So you can plug it into your computer. So you wouldn't give the memory card to them to take home because they can't do anything with it. So they would come in the morning on Thursday, and at 9 o'clock, you could just sit down with them, quickly put the memory card in your computer, and just kind of pick their 5 to 10 favorite images on your laptop. Okay. But yeah, really important. You know what, honestly, this idea of reminding them about critique, you kind of want to be doing it all day, not even just at the end of the day. Just constantly kind of be in their ear.
Yeah.
Like, try and take some really awesome pictures today because it's your last chance to get great shots for critique tomorrow. Like, always just kind of letting them know, because I mean, at the end of the day, like if you don't have campers that come in with pictures, it's a really big deal, because you can't run photo critique, and then we also don't have pictures for the slideshow. That's kind of the main point. So really, really important that we get images. Okay, and then your regular end of day reminder. So that's Wednesday, that's day 3. Did you have any questions there?
Nope, looks good.
Okay, awesome. Alrighty, so let's go Thursday, day 4. And so actually what I might as well point out to you while we're looking here on this page, this window, is that you'll notice there's only 4 days of lectures, right? You notice there is no lecture on day 5. Yeah. And that again is because there's no lesson on day 5. You just go kind of on that big field trip as a grand finale. So that's why there's only 4 days here. So we're going to open up our very last day. Okay, so as it loads. Oops. So we're on Thursday. So even more genres of photography as well as critique. So you know what, I think you can always, at the beginning of the day, if you feel like your students need it might be a great idea to always start with like a little bit of a review, kind of be like, okay guys, like what did we talk about yesterday? Give me some examples of the main kind of points and topics that we covered. But here especially we want to do a review because we're starting to get to the end of all the lessons and the content, right? So some questions that we want to ask is, let's start right at the beginning from day one. What do you guys remember about storytelling? What are the 3 stages that we need in every story? Beginning, middle, and end. Name 3 compositional rules that we talked about this week. Name a famous portrait photographer. So Annie Leibovitz would be the answer there. What style of photos emphasize shape and line? Great for architectural shots. Hint, you can change it in camera or with editing. So that would be black and white would be the answer. And then what type of photography do you most likely need a tripod for? So self-portraits would be the answer there. So it's all just pulling up stuff that you've talked about earlier in the week. And then you can say, okay, guys, that's our very last genre of photography that we're going to talk about in this camp. We're going to look at still life photography. So a still life is a photo of something that isn't moving or alive. It usually shows a common object. Traditionally, and especially in terms of like traditional paintings, still life very often encompass scenes of flowers or fruit. So just to give you some ideas of the types of subjects. And then showing them some examples of still life. So really kind of cool. Purple on purple. I love this shot here. The peppers. So like food as an example would be a great still life subject. And just like objects, you know, interesting objects. So playing around with tools here on a black background, very cool. The camera and kind of setting up a little scene here is really great too. I love this one and just how like abstract and simple it is. So just a spoon with some rice in it, I think, in the middle of the frame. Very cute. And you know what, as you're going through these examples, actually, this could be a great opportunity to talk about composition again, right? What compositional rules do we see being followed here, right? Simplicity in this case. What rule are we breaking? We're breaking rule of thirds in this one, so maybe talk a little bit about why. And why are you breaking rule of thirds here? Because the symmetry in the shot is really awesome, right? And then a still life, in terms of the lighting, what kind of lighting do we want to use for this? We want to look for natural daylight whenever possible. So if we are shooting indoors, we want to place our still life or our object beside a window. If we're outside, then we want to shoot under shade. It'd be like nice, soft, even lighting all the time. And then just in terms of a still life, the other thing that we can do is we can create a really cool background, which is everyday objects. So some like, these are almost like photography hacks, like little tricks that we can teach to get really cool effects. So one way is to create a still life, to create a still life photo is with a computer screen as your background. So there's a link down here that you're going to load. So I'm just going to copy. I'm going to open it for you here. And it's a link to Pinterest. So it kind of gives them this idea of a really cool technique that they can do. Do you see the Pinterest page loading on your screen?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So we can scroll down here. So something that is really fun that you're going to let them try is you want to look up, again, you're going to do all this before this day. You're going to look up cool backgrounds that you could always just save maybe in a folder on your desktop. So like bouquet as an example is a really good one. So you bring that up on your computer screen. You can put down like, this is just like a magazine or a book, or even if you just have like a piece of paper or something on top of the keyboard.
Yeah.
This is kind of getting fancy. They're using like a fancy slate, but you don't even have to do that here in this situation. And then if you zoom in, look at the kind of shots you can get.
That's fun.
Isn't that awesome? Like super simple, but super creative and just like super smart. So yeah, a really great example there. So, so yeah, like I said, have some backgrounds maybe saved on your computer already so that you can pull them up for them to do. And then the other point I was going to make, so remember how I just pulled up this Pinterest link page, right? So a tip for you, just in any of the classes that you're teaching, look through your lesson and whenever you know that you have to pull up a website or a video on YouTube, you want to load all of that before class even starts.
Definitely.
You don't want to like sit there like waiting for internet to like, it just totally like breaks the flow of the class. It's the worst. So just have everything loaded like right away. Okay, and then the activity. So let's try it here in the classroom. So obviously only one person will be able to shoot at your computer at a time to get the background. So you almost want to have like a couple stations. So one station could be, everyone could take a turn using your laptop background that you pick out, and then the rest of the group can try shooting with the window light. Some of them can even try shooting without the window light, and then they can kind of see the difference. So everybody can kind of rotate through all these different stations. Oh, and then just so you know, in terms of item of what they're actually going to be shooting. So here in Toronto, we have something that's called a prop cart. We use it for like all of our classes. It's a little cart. You'll see it here in the Nook, and it just has a ton of random stuff on it, like a grader and an old camera and I don't know, weird like ornaments from HomeSense. It's a lot of stuff from HomeSense. And the campers can just grab that cart at the beginning of the day, wheel it into your room, and at this point you can invite them, say, okay guys, come up here, choose any item that you want to shoot your still life from. You know, there's like a salt and pepper shaker. They could choose whatever they want and kind of go and shoot it. In other cities, you probably won't have a specific cart, but in other cities, you're going to have some sort of bin, I imagine, that's going to have just some random items in it for them to photograph. You can also, if you wanted to, let them know that this activity is going to happen the day before. I know they already have to worry about critique, and that is the most important, but you can kind of let them know, guys, we're also going to do some like still life shooting tomorrow. So if there's like an object or a toy that you really love, you could bring that in to shoot next week too, or tomorrow as well. Okay, so they're going to have a little bit of time to do that, and then critique is going to start immediately after. So I think in terms of the high-level agenda, let me just look here. I think critique starts around 11. I just want to make sure this is right. 10. It starts at 10 o'clock. So yeah, you really don't have a lot of time for still life because it won't take too long. And you start critique at 10. And you'll see it says part 1 here, because what we want to do with critique is, again, we want to split it. So you're going to do the first half of your campers. So let's say you have 15 campers. You're going to do like 7 of them maybe in the first half. And then you're going to take a break. Do a game. Definitely do a game on this day because, yeah, they're going to be sitting for a while. A running around outside game would even be ideal. Then come back. You can do a little, to continue that little bit of a break from critique, you can talk about some aspiring young photographers. So there's a link there that you can pull up on Instagram for Hawkeye Huey. He's like a kid who's, I don't even know how old he is, like 12 maybe, if that. His dad, I think, is a professional photographer, but he has an awesome Instagram page, tons of followers, and he's still young. So this could be a really good inspirational page to show them. This is another photographer here. And this person won an award for her photographic work, American Girls by Age 12. That's incredible. I didn't even know that. There's no link added here in the notes. I'll add one if I can find one. But again, just be ready maybe to Google the photographer. I'm just going to make a note so I remember. Okay. Great. And another one, so this kid, Austin, there was a documentary about him a bunch of years ago now. We actually used to show it in our Teen Camp 1 program, but it's so kind of dated now that it's not really relevant for the campers anymore. But he was like a teenage paparazzi kind of kid who was like at the age of 13 photographing like Paris Hilton and like all these like celebrities at the time. So that's just another cool person to pull up. And there's a link there again for maybe a YouTube clip. Olivia B. I'm not super familiar with Olivia B. actually.
No, me neither.
Pardon?
Me neither.
You don't know her either? Yeah, so I recommend looking her up. Go to oliviab.com. Maybe find out a little bit more about her.
Yeah.
I can't remember. I don't remember her. She's 23, so she's not exactly a kid, but still quite young in age. So that's probably the reason that we're pulling her up here. I just don't remember her.
Yeah.
Okay, so then that's like a nice little break, and then you're going to get into critique part 2. So now you're going through the second half of the campers you haven't covered yet, and just going through their images. So I know that there are some tips on running a critique in that teaching tips video that you've been sent and that you already watched, which is fantastic. So just kind of remember the general tips for critique. So without getting into the tips, because I know that they're there in that video, I would just say that overall, yeah, the biggest challenge with critique is just kind of to keep it like moving and kind of keep it interesting and engaging is probably the hardest part. The really nice thing about 8 to 12-year-olds is, like I said, they love talking about their opinions. Actually, teens, sometimes it's like pulling teeth, but with kids, they're like, they always just want to talk about pictures. So, I mean, I remember running kids camp a couple times years ago where the kids were like, this is my favorite part. Like they loved this more than like some of the other stuff. So I don't think you're going to have an especially hard time here, but yeah, just remember like, how can I keep this the most engaging? Get them to talk a lot, get them to answer questions a lot. And if you find that it's kind of moving slowly and it needs to move along a little quicker, not even move along a little quicker. If you find that it's getting a little dragged on, then again, just take more breaks, you know, go through like 2 or 3 people and wash and break, 2 or 3 people, game break, and then kind of break it up that way. Again, keeping those video clips that I said that are really important as instructor, just to sort of have in your back pocket would be a really great thing to do at this point too. Like, okay guys, let's just stop for 2 minutes and watch this video about pet photography or something like that. Those would be my biggest tips there for critique. Did you have any questions about this day or about critique specifically? Because it can be kind of like a tricky thing to run.
No, I think I'll be pretty comfortable with the critiques just because I've done so many myself, and then of course I'm going to keep it positive for the kids. So yeah, it should be good.
Okay, great. Oh, one thing that can really help too at the beginning, we do this for teens and kids too, is Yeah, I mean, if they've never participated in a critique before, it could be really helpful at the beginning before you start with the first student to kind of give them like, okay, guys, these are some like guidelines, not rules, but like guidelines for photo critique. So you mentioned something there that's really important to remember is, yeah, keeping it positive, right? So you can kind of say to them, someone's going to go and we're going to look at their images. We're going to allow them to talk first about the picture and maybe tell us the story behind it and how they got it. And then we're going to start by talking about what we think is working really well in the picture. We'll talk about what we think is successful. And then from there, we can give the person maybe some feedback on anything that maybe could be improved. And that would be something that you would want to kind of lead there too. Yeah, giving those, and then in those guidelines that you're giving them, you could also give them examples of like comments that they could make. So you could say, okay, guys, when looking and critiquing a photographer's work, we could talk about compositional rules. What are they again? Get them to tell you. We could talk about shallow depth of field, wide depth of field. We could talk about some of the technical considerations, just to kind of guide them a little bit as to what to say. I think could be really helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, so then that's critique. And then lunch again for 1 to 2. And field trip activity, you know what? I don't think that there's a specific field trip activity for this day. The last day here is, on day 4, your field trip here in Toronto is to Brookfield Building. So yeah, there's not really a specific activity. I think this is maybe just a really great day to maybe summarize, like for them to maybe pull on all the techniques and kind of things that they've learned here that they could apply. Even like some of the feedback that they get from critique, they could give them ideas for things to shoot. So it's a little bit more of an open-ended field trip, and I think that's okay for their last one. Yeah, so that's day 4. And I'm gonna go back to the master agenda because there are no slides for day 5. But yeah, there's no lesson really involved here. So on day 5, you're gonna start off with an icebreaker. Your icebreaker on day 5 could range anywhere from 9 to 9:15 to 9 to 9:30. And the reason that you might be prepared for a longer icebreaker on day 5 is that a lot of the locations that we tend to go to for field trip only open at like 10 o'clock. So we kind of have like a little bit more time to fill, even with like, the time it takes us to walk over to a place.
Yeah.
So do a longer field trip here, icebreaker here. Field trip is gonna take place anywhere between 9:30 and 10 o'clock until lunch, which is 12. Then we have lunch, and we talked about that guest speaker or outdoor game sort of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, day 5 is really straightforward. It's kind of like simple, right? Because there's no real lesson there or anything.
Yeah. I mean, that's how most camps wrap up.
Yeah, so, it's kind of like the fun day,
Yeah.
Yeah, and the details of the exhibit, just so you know, I'm not going to go there today. We're just going to talk strictly about program planning, but all the details about like guest speakers and the exhibit will be covered in camp orientation again. So that, when everybody will learn about it. So you'll just learn a little bit about like the setup and kind of the format of what happens at an exhibit, what your responsibilities will be there. But yeah, you'll talk all about that in the camp orientation. Yeah, so in a nutshell, that is Kids Camp 2. I'm going to explain one more thing and then I'll open it up to you in just in case you have any other questions. So the one other thing that would be good to note about this master agenda that we see here on the screen is that right now this is showing you the format for a 5-day schedule. So when camp runs from Monday to Friday. It's really important to note that there are certain weeks in the summer that are only 4 days because of a holiday. And that holiday might fall on a Monday or it might fall on the Friday. So like Canada Day long weekend here in Canada as an example, or 4th of July in the States, right? All those kind of condense our week. So in the event that you are teaching a camp in a 4-day schedule as opposed to a 5, what'll happen is that when you scroll down on this master agenda, underneath the 5-day schedule, there's gonna be a little box here that'll say short week changes. And I can actually pull up an example. I'm just gonna show you the Teen Camp 1 agenda just so you can see. So if we scroll underneath here, see here it says short week changes. So what it'll do is it'll just tell you how to condense everything into 4 days instead of 5. So just as an example, like this is Teen Camp 1. I know these topics aren't gonna mean too much to you, but they kind of like condense some of the lessons together. So like panning and zooming, let's say, gets squished into 1 day as opposed to being separated. So it won't be like super detailed like the one that you see above because all the details. It'll just show you the order and how it's gonna change on a short week. Okay. So that might not even apply to Kids Camp 1. I have to kind of look and see, but if it does, then on any camp, you're going to scroll down. And I mean, I I don't know if this will ever happen for Kids Camp 2, but I mean, there might be a situation where you might have a big group where it's like 2 sessions that kind of, or it's 2 sessions that merge together. And then again, there'll be some changes there. But any of those extra notes will always be underneath the master agenda.
Okay.
Yeah, that was a really good thing to bring up. Just trying to think if there's anything else while I'm thinking. Any other questions that on any of the days, or even not even on a day, just any questions that you have at this point that you can think of?
One just tiny little question. For like the icebreaker games, will those be assigned, or can I just come up with whatever icebreaker games I want?
Yeah, you can come up with your own. So during camp orientation week, you guys are going to go through just a whole bunch of different games, like as a group every day, just to kind of maybe teach you some that you might not know. And actually, it could be a really great opportunity for you, if you don't know a lot of camp games during camp orientation, to ask like our camp counselors who are going to be present, not just our instructors, because they're like our camp pros. They're people that have been like working at camps for years. So if you don't have that camp background, it could be nice to kind of maybe touch base with one of them and be like, yeah, like what are some of your favorite camp games? Can you explain them to me? Otherwise, it is up to you. You can come up with whichever ones that you want. My biggest recommendation is that any get to know you games would be really great, obviously, to do at the beginning of the week. So if you've ever done like 2 Truths and a Lie as an example, that's a great one for the beginning of the week. Any sort of name game where you have to like remember people's names, that's good for the beginning of the week as well.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's completely up to you.
Okay, cool. And what generally will be the class sizes for Kids Camp 2?
That's good. Yeah, good question too. Kids Camp 2, I'm going to say that on average, you're probably looking at about maybe 12 campers or so would be the average. What entails a large group? It's really hard to say, but I would say like 15 to 17 might be a large group, but on average, you're probably looking at closer to 12.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And then any time that they have to work in partners, like say for the silhouette exercise, should those partners be their buddies to avoid having them choose their own partners?
Ooh, good question. I would say that you could play that one by ear, like depends on the group.
Yeah.
So like if as an example, if as an example you had a group that's maybe really shy and people are kind of, not really comfortable of picking their own buddies, then or picking their own partners for activities, then for sure you could do the buddy thing. If you have, so sometimes actually what happens with kids camp, especially with their younger group, is sometimes a camper will come with like a friend. So it's like, I come to camp and I signed up with my best friend. And in that situation, we kind of want to do things together, and it's okay. Like they've come to camp together, so that's fine. So they then in that situation, like you might want to let them pick their partners because the friends might want to stick together. And then obviously then there's also a fine line of if they pick their partners for activities and like, let's say certain kids maybe are getting like left out, then you forming the groups, it's a great opportunity for you to kind of like break that dynamic. So it really depends on the group, I would say. So it's up to you, but those would be kind of like the different scenarios to think about. Yeah.
All right. I think that's all my questions.
Okay, wonderful. There was one more thing I was going to say before we wrap up, and now I can't remember. Short week changes we were talking about. Oh, the other thing I just wanted to remind you of too is that in Kids Camp 2, you're always going to have a counselor with you. So having a camp counselor, just remember, you're not here by yourself. So what that means is it's just, I want to encourage you to always remember that you have that counselor there and to feel free to use them as someone who's there to help you, right? They're there to support you with that. So in any situation where you have to transition from a lecture to now all of a sudden you're doing a demo, you can, at the beginning of the day, when you come in and meet with your counselor, kind of give them a little bit of a briefing, so the counselor too, just so you know, like we don't go into this level of detail with the counselor, right? We
yeah.
the instructor. So it's sort of your responsibility, because you know the program inside and out, to give that counselor guidance on how they should help you, because they won't know. So in the event, and we see that a lot in this camp especially, you're very often going from lesson to demo now. And again, we want to eliminate as much like awkward transition time where campers are just kind of like waiting for you to set something up. So in any situation like that, you really want to utilize your counselor and kind of let them know, you know, at the beginning of the day, okay, when I get to this point in the lecture, if you can go now and either start setting this up if it's not set up already, like kind of use that person to help you get through the transitions. And you know, rely on your counselor too. You know, you're going to be kind of up there presenting and just talking a lot, that, you know, halfway through the morning, you're gonna be, I'm like, you might get tired of just like talking and having to present. So your counselor is also there to give you like the game and washroom break, just so you know, it's as much for the campers as it is for you too. So if you need to go use the washroom, if you just like need a second to get a glass of water or something, that game in the washroom break is when the counselor is, so that's their job, is for them to step in, and it's their job now to run that game so that you have a few minutes to do whatever you need to do. So just keep that in mind as well. Okay.
Awesome.
Great. Okay. Well, then if there's no other questions, I'm going to wrap up the training schedule there, or training session there. And then, so what's going to follow is I'm going to send you an email that's going to have all these resources for you. So it's going to have all the links again to the master agenda. It's going to have links to the slides and the presentation. And then actually the one thing that I didn't show you was your field trip planner. So let me just stop my screen sharing for a second. And let me just find where that is. So the field trip planner will be, like I said, sent to you as well. And it's a really good breakdown of your field trips every day, and kind of like what are the key things to either think about on that field trip, or what are the key things to like look for on the field trip. So the planner will outline literally like places that are really good for you to like stop to take a picture. You can even in the field trip planner fill out games that you want to play while you're on field trip to kind of just break up the shooting a little bit, because that's okay to do too. So, okay, I'm going to bring this up here. Okay, you see like a spreadsheet in front of you, yes? Okay, so this says field trip planner, and this is for Toronto because again, every city is different as well. And we've got tabs all along the bottom. So we're gonna click on Kids 2. And so you'll see here, right? So it says day 1, so this coincides with your lessons and with your master agenda. And your field trip destination is OCAD and Grange Park. It says what the main assignment is, which is Toy Story in this case. And then it gives some great like shooting spots to kind of look out for. So when you're in OCAD and Grange Park, you know, campers can use the benches and surfaces for shooting their toys. The underside of the building of OCAD with like the pencil legs, that little courtyard area is where it's a good opportunity to do this. Just as like another extra great shot, you know, it might be outside of the assignment and that's okay, but doing leading lines with like the pencil legs running up to the building could be really great. In Grange Park, there's lots of grass and trees and benches, etc., which again is really great for the assignment too. And then there's going to be a link here, which will be updated, that'll show you an actual map. It'll show you like an actual route for you to take on how to get there and how to get back. And then here would be kind of where you want to fill it in, or at least in your mind, be like, you know what, I should have like 1 or 2 games, and so that if I need to kind of stop during field trip, or they're not, you know, they need a break from shooting, these are some games that I can play. So as an example, actually this one's filled out. So the name game could be a great one to do. And then you can put in here like a location if you want to, of like where to play it. So I'm going to stop when I get to this corner or get to this side of the park, and now I'm going to do a name game with them. Yeah, so it'll have that here for day 1. I'll let you look through this at another time, but day 2, day 3, day 4, it's all outlined here. Some things are missing some details, but I will make sure they get filled in. Yeah, and that's just a guide for you to kind of have as another resource.
Looks good.
Alrighty. Okay, well then, if there's no other questions, then that wraps it up for our live training session for Kids Camp 2. Is there anything else that you wanted to ask?
Oh, yeah. One also question that I thought of. For the instructors, do we wear a uniform or do we wear our own clothes?
That's a really good question. The only thing that you have to wear is a t-shirt. So that's part of like our uniform. It's just a very plain like white cotton t-shirt that has our logo on it. So, yeah, that's the only thing that we require.
Sounds good.
Okay, awesome. All right, so then, yeah, I'm gonna just end it here, and then I will see you as a follow-up during our live live Q&A session. And that'll be an opportunity for you to ask any other questions. So my biggest advice, I purposely scheduled the Q&A to be, as far away from this date as possible. So take time now to kind of, once I send you all the resources and all the links, to review everything on your own. Think about everything that we talked about today as well. And and make sure that you feel comfortable with everything. And then during that Q&A session will be an opportunity for you to, again, last minute chance kind of thing, to follow up on any other questions that you have. Okay?
Will do. Okay.
Great. All right. Well, thanks. I will talk to you soon.
Okay, that sounds good.
Bye.
Bye.